Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Very happy to have with us our dear colleague and brother, Dr. Serdar. He's visiting us these days, so we wanted to maximize the use or misuse of his presence to keep him as busy as we can. So he was willing to give this lecture, and he freely chose the topic, isn't
Yes.
it? So there was no pressure whatsoever on transhumanism, and it is really a very timely topic in general, and something which I personally like because of my interest in the field of bioethics and now also AI and what we call socially disruptive technologies. So very happy that he chose the topic and that he wants to be with us today. Now I leave and inshallah there will be further collaboration together and about these issues. Now the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Ghali. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce Professor Kurnaz, who is Professor for Law at Berlin Institute for Islamic Theology at Humboldt University in Berlin since January 2020. He completed his habilitation at Friedrich Alexander University at Erlangen on Ibn Rushd's legal philosophy, and his PhD at Goethe University at Frankfurt in 2015 on the methods of deriving norms, istinbat al-ahkam in Islamic legal theory, usul al-fiqh. He studied in Frankfurt Islamic studies, Jewish-Christian religious studies and education. He served as a director of the Swiss Center for Islam and Society at the University of Freiburg in Switzerland. In 2016, he was appointed assistant professor of Islamic theology at the Academy of World Religions at University of Hamburg before moving to Berlin, right?
Yes.
His research interests include emergency and development of Islamic law, development of Islamic law, Islamic legal methodology, legal theory, philosophy, as well as Quranic exegesis and hadith studies. Well, it's our pleasure. The floor is yours. We are very excited to hear you.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. And thank you very much for the invitation, dear Dr. Mohammed Ghali and Dr. Samir Rashwani. It's an honor for me to present here preliminary ideas on transhumanism. I was actually, and honestly, I was forced to write an article on that issue by a colleague of mine and a close friend of mine, but it was quite fun, and I wanted to share this fun with you together. And thank you for coming also in such high number at the end of a semester. I can imagine how busy all of you are. So today's I want to draw your attention today on recent developments regarding a specific philosophy, or let's say ideology, that deals with human existence, transhumanism. The aim of the presentation is to highlight some aspects of the transhumanist idea of enhancement, such as transcending human body or longevity, and reflect on them from an Islamic ethico-legal perspective as preliminary observations. After outlining the main principles, qawaid, and ethical foundations of Islamic law, I will explore the Islamic legal concepts of responsibility, taklīf or ahliyya, physical integrity called ḥurma, and the concept of body in relation to challenges of transhumanist enhancement. My aim is to highlight that the bodily experience and existence of humans is a core aspect of the systematic framework of Islamic law and ethics, and the notion of transcending the human body, for instance, challenges the very foundations of Islamic law and ethics, including key rituals like prayer, fasting, and pilgrimage. It is not only important to engage with transhumanism because it is a prominent discussion, and of course whether people like Elon Musk enforce transhumanist ideas, societal and technological advancements influenced and are still influencing practices of believers and offers previously unknown ways of living life. For instance, medical technologies enable the treatment of diseases through medication and organ transplantation that were not possible so far. And as believers seek to live in accordance with the principles and requirements of the religion, these developments require ethical and legal reflection to determine under what circumstances it is justified to follow these developments. The Islamic tradition has a flexible and dynamic structure that does not automatically yield a positive or negative evaluation of these developments in general and of transhumanist enhancement in particular. It allows for interdisciplinary evaluation, which I want to illustrate through 3 hypothetical cases of transhumanistic enhancement that was proposed by using ChatGPT actually. So briefly on the state of the art, there has been little done so far on the Islamic tradition and its relation to transhumanist ideas. There is very little on Islamic law and the reflection on transhumanism. I found 2 special issues focusing on these topics in general. The first one, edited by my colleague Hurayra Kam, Journal of Ethics and Emerging Technologies. It is an open access. And the second one, also published, the articles are all in English. Ilahiyat Studies in Turkey, Transhumanism and Artificial Intelligence. And I have to admit that the most of the articles here are on transhumanism in general and not specifically on artificial intelligence. What we can see also is there are some general overviews in articles before. Here are some published articles on transhumanism and Islam in general. Most of them are very critical, except of Hurayra Kam. He tries to engage with transhumanism in a very positive sense. The other ones are criticizing transhumanism and saying that this is not compatible with the Islamic tradition. Regarding Islamic law, there is a focus on using AI from an ethico-legal perspective. The first 2 ones or 3 ones are very general, highlighting the use of maqasid al-sharia or general precepts in order to engage with AI. We have more in-depth analysis in Izzeddin al-Mahjoub's article and Sofia Tsurlaki's article, and also the first article, Latifi Hassan. Especially the last 2 ones, Sofia Tsurlaki and Hassan Latifi, focus on fatwa issuing using AI, and both of them are more or less critically of using AI because AI leads to biases in training data and algorithm. It lacks of AI. It suffers under AI hallucination, which is a technical term for using AI, and the AI creates new knowledge that has no basis at all in the religious sources. Or there is a lack of transparency and inexplicability in judgment and decision making. Of course, as we are here at CILE, here are also many, he has many studies related to transhumanism, but are not named as such, for instance, genomics and bioethics, etc. Now, before we delve into the Islamic legal and ethical discussion, I would like to make some preliminary remarks on enhancement in the context of transhumanism to clarify in which framework I will address the aforementioned notions and concepts. Transhumanism as its core can be circumscribed as a philosophical and intellectual movement that advocates for the enhancement of human capabilities through the application of science and technology. It believes in the possibility and desirability of fundamentally altering the human condition by using various tools and techniques such as biotechnology, nanotechnology, AI, and cognitive science. The idea of enhancing human capabilities encompasses a wide range of possibilities, including cognitive enhancement, which involves improving human cognitive abilities such as memory, intelligence, attention span, and creativity. Examples include nootropic drugs, brain-computer interfaces, and cognitive training programs, as well as AI-supported knowledge generation. The physical enhancement, on the other hand, allows expanding physical strength, endurance, sensory perception, and overall health. Examples range from prosthetic limbs and exoskeletons to genetic engineering for muscle growth and enhanced senses. One important issue among discussions on transhumanism is longevity, or the desire for longevity. Transhumanist often seeks way to extend human lifespan and health span, aiming for radical life extension and even immortality. Strategies may involve regenerative medicine, genetic engineering, and advanced healthcare technologies. Enhancing human perception beyond natural capabilities such as infrared vision, ultrasonic hearing, or even new senses altogether is also part of transhumanistic ideas of enhancement. These examples illustrate the diverse ways in which transhumanists envision enhancing human capabilities work. However, ethical considerations regarding safety, equity, and the potential consequences of these enhancements are crucial aspects of the discourse within transhumanist as well as Islamic thought. Since the ethical interpretations of Islamic legal theory allow scholars to engage with questions related to transhumanism, contemporary approaches see in Islamic law either a deontology or a consequentialist or utilitarian ethics. Deontology refers to the form of normative ethics according to which the binding nature and quality of moral actions and judgments are derived from the obligation to certain behaviors or maxims of actions, in principle independent of prior purposes and possible consequences of action. Consequentialism or utilitarianism is the opposite. It is a form of purpose-oriented, let's say teleological ethics basically. It states that an action is morally right if it maximizes the aggregated total benefit, which is the sum of the well-being of all those affected. It is very well known that there are different approaches in Islamic history regarding the determinants of good and evil, the question of tahsin and taqbih. Regardless of these differing theories on al-husn wal-qabh, none of the madahib developed a purely rationalistic legal philosophy and ethics. However, the intensity of the reference to the religious texts within these schools varied. Thus, evaluating whether transhumanist enhancement are permitted or prohibited requires reliance on religious sources and the principles derived from them. This led mainly to an ethical structure of Islamic jurisprudence, at least for the Sunni tradition, that can be best described as deontology rather than consequentialism. In the modern period, Muslim scholars pled more for a utilitarian approach based on pre-modern and modern ideas on masalih and maqasid, and regarding the overall objectives of Islamic law and the protection of human life, it is generally possible for Muslim scholars to argue in favor of transhumanist enhancement, provided its goal is the improvement of human life, progeny, wealth, reason, and religion, the famous darurat al-khamsa. However, it is not necessary to follow a consequentialist understanding of Islamic ethics in order to argue in favor of transhumanist enhancement. Scholars can focus on the universal principles of Islamic law, which could be interpreted in the sense of its deontological structure. Legal principles, which scholars derived systematically and inductively from the vast legal tradition of substantive law, furu' al-fiqh, allow a more nuanced evaluation of transhumanist enhancements, since these principles go back to a number of established rulings, ahkam, from substantive law. There are at least five universal principles of Islamic law which are the core of each religious and ethical considerations. These are acts are measured by what they are used for, al-umur bi-maqasidiha. Doubt cannot override certainty, al-yaqin la yazul bi-shak. Hardship brings about simplicity, al-mashaqqa tajlib al-taysir. Damage or harm should be removed, al-darar yuzal, and custom is determinative, al-'ada muhakkama. These principles help to concretize the overarching principle that every action is permissible unless proven otherwise, known as the concept of ibaha asliyya. Therefore, there is no neutral space in daily life when it comes to the religious evaluation of believers' practices. Every action is either permissible and thus not sinful, or forbidden if indicated by religious sources or legal principles and precepts. There are, of course, further basic concepts that concretize the normative assessment based on these ethical principles. This is legal responsibility, which is both an ethical and legal responsibility that is related to the concept of body and in its integrity in the Islamic legal tradition, which is direct effects on transhumanist ideas. So the conditions for legal responsibility and legal capacity or the right of personality, taklīf, ahliyya, and dhimma, are controversially discussed in the legal literature. Scholars agree that free men and women who are of legal age and of sound mind have full legal capacity to act, which is called ahliyat al-ada, and have an unrestricted religious and ethical responsibility. The scholars saw biological indications and bodily developments as a point of reference for determining the age of legal and religious responsibility. As you all know, usually the onset of puberty, which is the minimum age at 9 years for girls and 12 years for boys, otherwise 15 for both if the bodily experience of puberty does not occur. All adult believers have the same legal capacity and religious responsibility unless there are conditions such as mental or physical disability. The main challenge with transhumanist developments, such as the possibility of transcending the human body and replacing it with other forms or avatars that do not meet the requirements for bodily development, is that how religious responsibility and legal capacity can be argued if the aforementioned bodily developments are completely absent. The issue of legal and religious responsibility has further important aspects for today's engagement with transhumanist subjects, like the idea of basic rights that should be protected and are justified by human existence, called in usul fiqh ahliyat al-wujub. This capacity gives embryos in the womb of their mother the right to inherit as a family member if someone passes away in the family. It gives rise to basic rights that should be protected, known also as isma, literally to translate as being protected, in Hanafi law especially. Isma guarantees human beings, regardless of their religious identity, the fundamental right of life and possess property. These rights are justified by the fertilization of the oocyte and the ensoulment of the zygote, which is calculated up to the 16th week of pregnancy, with the well-known discussion among scholars. This establishes fundamental rights for the embryo, such as the right of a share in inheritance. Here again, if procreation, as we know it, can be transformed through transhumanist enhancement, and if sexuality no longer plays any role, how can scholars argue for these basic rights? The question arises as to how the reproduction of humans, genetic engineering, and other forms of procreation can be dealt with, and how this affects the idea of protection of life and progeny. It is, for instance, unclear whether robots that are controlled by humans or even AI, which can imitate human actions or even think by themselves, are considered to be fully legally responsible. How do we define consciousness? Which role does it play for legal and ethical responsibility? One possible answer is the dichotomy of material body and immaterial soul. The idea of legal, ethical, and religious responsibility can be related to the dichotomy of the material body and immaterial soul of humans. The latter, for instance, is challenged by transhumanist concepts. They do not accept an idea of immaterial soul. Looking back at pre-modern scholarship, scholars sometimes link this discussion with philosophical ideas about mind and soul. For instance, the Ottoman scholar Mullah Khusraw, who died in 1480, follows Neoplatonist ideas of intellect and soul and relates them to the concept of legal responsibility in Islamic legal theory. For Mullah Khusraw, reason is the faculty of the soul which enables us to gain knowledge and to act according to our deliberations. He then divides the intellect into theoretical and practical, in nadari and amali, and sets his focus on the nadari intellect. Theoretical intellect has 4 different stages that correlate with the state of the soul. The first is the material intellect, the aql al-hayulani. This is the rational soul at the beginning of its created nature. The second stage is the dispositional intellect, aql bil-malaka, which is the soul that can grasp knowledge objects that are self-evident. It can grasp the laws of thought and attain further theoretical knowledge. The third stage is actual intellect, aql bil-fi'l, the intellect that has acquired theoretical knowledge and has access to it whenever it wants, but does not consider it at the moment. The fourth stage is acquired knowledge, aql mustafad, coming about when the intelligible forms are actually present in the soul. For Mullah Khusraw, the two stages of material intellect and dispositional intellect, the first two ones, are required in order to argue for legal responsibility. To be a legal subject and have the capacity to act, one must, Mullah Khusraw says, presuppose that the capacity to decide between good and bad and act accordingly is presupposed. For him, this ability to reflect demonstrates that humans have moral obligations. Mullah Khusraw's approach in his Usul Fiqh work, which is admittedly uncommon in legal theoretical texts, especially in earlier ones, presupposes a dichotomy between the material body and the immaterial soul. However, it is disputed among scholars whether the soul should be considered immaterial or material. In general, Muslim scholars and philosophers accept the dichotomy of the material body and the immaterial soul. An Ethico, Turkish theologian, however, argues that it is not a theological necessity to hold to the dichotomy of material body and immaterial soul. For him, materiality does not have to be reduced to the body. It can be assumed for the soul, which is for him a requirement for the engagement with transhumanist ideas, since in transhumanism there is no room for the notion of an immaterial soul. Doko wants therefore to provide a philosophical and theological foundation for the existence of conscious and intelligent machines and their potential compatibility with Islamic beliefs. That has definitely consequences for also the idea of resurrection, bodily resurrection, but that is a different topic on which I cannot delve in now. Let us consider the realization of the idea of longevity, and let us assume that humans can transcend the body and transfer their consciousness, mind or soul to a non-bodily avatar. The question of legal responsibility and personhood remains unresolved. Am I a new person, and am I accountable for my actions in the past with a different body, avatar in present or in future as well? And let us also assume that a person has the choice to remain in his or her body, but later decides to transcend it. What about the life he or she lived under human body conditions? Am I responsible for actions I could have taken had I chosen to transcend the body earlier? Furthermore, the religious sources Quran and Sunnah do not understand the soul as separate from the human body. It is unclear whether the attempt of separation of the soul and its transfer to an avatar is, theologically speaking, possible, and it is totally unclear what consequences that would entail. Does it result in the creation of a new person or being? What happens to the freedom of action and mental faculties of this new being if it is decoupled from the concept of soul, spirit or mind, and reduced only to neuronal connections? Who holds the capacity to act? The being itself or the creator of this new being, whoever that may be? And if one transcends the human body, what does this mean for laws related to bodily experience and performance, such as religious rituals? The latter question leads us to discuss another basis of Islamic law, the human body and its physical integrity. The potential triumph over physicality by transferring a person's spirit, soul or mind to a non-corporeal avatar or substance would have sincere consequences for Islamic law, since many rulings in Islamic law and ethics are related to bodily existence. For instance, Muslim believers are obliged to perform a strictly ritualized prayer 5 times a day, the Salah. A prerequisite for Salah is ritual purification, tahara, be it wudu or ghusl, since different daily activities can lead to ritual impurity. Further, physical impurity can hinder performing the prayer, like soiled clothing or soiled prayer room. Once humans transcend their physicality and body, the question of ritual purity would become obsolete, with consequences for the 5 daily prayers, for which ritual purity is a prerequisite. Muslim scholars commonly accept as a principle that if the cause for a norm does not exist, the corresponding regulation does not exist either. If there is no illah, there is no hukm. If the hukm is based on illah, of course. Does this then mean that Muslim believers would no longer be required to pray or purify ritually, the transhuman Muslims? Or could it be argued that ritual purity is no longer a prerequisite for transhumans, which would be a direct contradiction to religious sources that describe ritual prayers that do not have an illah? Since ritual purity can be understood as a symbolic act, should its performance be reinterpreted, which is commonly rejected regarding ibadat, rituals, or should the new body be ritually washed for each prayer, even if it has not been involved in actions that lead to ritual impurity regarding the human body? This approach would require the development of new hermeneutics, epistemology, and legal philosophy within Islamic law, since rituals, ibadat, in the existing Islamic legal tradition, do not directly correspond to a ratio legis, to a illah, that determines ritual practice, and thus cannot be reinterpreted in new ways. In contrast to the regulations in the field of mu'amalat, the interpersonal relationship. The possibility of transcending the human body has implications for further rituals like fasting. Fasting in particular is not possible for AI-controlled robots or human spirits transcending human bodies that does not need food for maintenance and existence. If food and sexual pleasure are erased and humans transcend these needs, fasting, defined as the restraint from consuming food and engaging in sexual intercourse from sunrise to sunset, would become totally obsolete, even though it is one of the pillars of Islam. Consequently, one of the most important acts of worship that fosters closeness to God, ḥurma, would also be rendered obsolete. Going beyond rituals, if we consider the above-mentioned purposes of Islamic law, protection of life, religion, reason, progeny and property, we can see that some of them are directly related to the body. There are even regulations concerning the dead body and funerals, janazat. Upon death, the body of the believer should be washed for the last time in a ritual purification, wrapped in shrouds, and treated with reverence by masking bad odors and prohibiting cremation or disturbing the peace of the deceased. Looking at further aspect of the concept of body in Islamic law, we see that it is based on the binary system of men and women. However, it also recognizes a type of third gender, an intersex called khuntha, and although pre-modern Muslim scholars have an idea of a third gender, Islamic law does not transcend heteronormativity. There is no longer a concept of non-gendered legal system that functioned without any kinship or family relations, that deals with inheritance law, punishment, marriage, and divorce. These laws are constantly based on bodily relations and physicality, which also has an effect on clothing ethics, how men and women have to dress, which parts of the body should be covered during rituals, and rules of social conduct. Although pre-modern Islamic law entailed detailed rulings regarding corporeal punishment and payment for blood money in cases like homicide, modern states with Muslim majority populations, with few exceptions, do not rely on traditional Islamic law and penal law. But looking at rulings related to clothing, we see that they are especially important for the correct performance of prayer, as there are different requirements of body covering for men and women when performing it. The same is also true for the pilgrimage as part of ritualized worship in Islamic law. And if humans transcend human body, there will be no need for clothing, and these requirements would be obsolete. Regulations to social conduct would be affected insofar as sexuality would be obsolete if humans could transfer their mind to non-binary, non-sexual avatars. Marriage contracts would thus be obsolete, since marriage in traditional Islamic law is closely related to legitimized sexual intercourse and found a family, and also to sexual ethics. Since there will be no sexuality demanded in avatar relationships, marriage law would be obsolete, which would also affect inheritance law. Regarding the body, finally, I want to highlight some further restrictions to the transhumanistic notion of enhancement. According to Islamic law, the human body is only an entrusted good in amana to human beings by God, because everything that God has created belongs to Him. The Quran states that humans start living with God, and with their death they will return to Him. And thus, humans do not have the right to treat their bodies as they wish. The body enjoys a special right, which is conceptualized by the technical term of the protection of its integrity, which is called ḥurma. Thus, every intervention to this integrity, be it usual surgery, must be argued for its validity. Enhancements are therefore restricted by this ḥurma. This goes so far that the dead body of a believer is protected, which has also implications for the validity of autopsy. Mutilation of the corpse is strongly prohibited, and any encroachment on the body, dead or alive, must be justified by necessity or public interest, darura and maslaha. This does not mean that the concept of bodily integrity only expresses prohibitions. Rather, interventions may be permitted or even required to protect life and human existence. There is no single best way to approach this concept, nor is there a single best way to address the cases of transhumanist interventions in the human body. The issue lies in the fact that the categories of public and individual interest and necessity that justify such interventions could also justify transhumanist enhancement, especially for physical handicaps affecting the daily life, missing hand or leg, for example. Therefore, it is necessary for religious scholars to engage with interdisciplinary research, such as with regard to philosophy, theology, biology, medicine, and sociology, to assess whether there is a societal or individual necessity or an interest worth protecting. Now, having delved into these theoretical preliminaries of Islamic law and ethics, let's focus on fictitious case studies. So far, we have seen that both the structure and concept of Islamic law would be affected of transhumanist enhancement of the human body. Related to the theological attitude of the scholars, such enhancement could be treated differently regarding their religious normative evaluation. I want to discuss briefly 3 potential cases that could be relevant for religious evaluation. First, brain-computer interface for enhanced Quran memorization and robot imams. Second, virtual reality pilgrimage. And third, artificial wombs, which is called ectogenesis. Let's start with the first case study, brain-computer interface. Quran memorization has a long tradition in Islamic cultures, and memorizing the Quran, as you all very well know, is not only a pious act of particularly religious believers. Every Muslim has to memorize parts of the Quran for the performance of the daily 5 prayers. Especially for believers whose native language is not Arabic, memorizing the Quran can be a challenge. Assuming that there is a brain-computer interface for Quran memorization, this interface would ease the non-Arabic speakers especially to learn the Quran by heart for the performance of their prayers, and would also enable them to recite the Quran correctly. Let's ask if it's permissible then in Islamic law to use technology to facilitate religious goals, or should memorization of the Quran remain a purely human effort? Islamic law often encourages the use of permissible means to achieve religious goals. Many scholars discuss whether means that lead to a permissible action should be regarded as permissible in general, and vice versa. The technical term behind this is blocking or opening legal means, satr dhara'i or fathu dhara'i. Since brain-computer interface for Quran memorization would allow to perform the prayer and devote oneself with memorizing the Quran, one could argue that it is permissible to use it. One could go a step further and argue that allowing to use brain-computer interface supports the idea of protection of religion, one of the objectives of Islamic law. Scholars might allow the use of brain-computer interface if it does not alter the individual's mental faculties or create a dependency. However, is the question of memorizing the Quran only a technical question? Does using such a technology compromise the spiritual significance of memorization, given that the effort and dedication traditionally associated with it are reduced? And scholars often underline that the effort to learn, to read and recite the Quran by heart carries inherent spiritual value. This, however, could be diminished by technological aid. Reciting the Quran, either by heart or by reading the Quranic text, is related also to afterworldly reward and is associated with the positive influence of the Quran on the human body and psyche. Thus, repeated reading of the Quran leads to God's blessing in this world and the hereafter. This repetition and the effort of learning the Quran would be lost if there were no need for repetition, so as not to forget what the believers has memorized already. One could also argue for a middle way position between these two extremes. In classical doctrinal texts in Islamic law, scholars discuss whether it is allowed to recite a translation of the Quran during the prayer. A minority of the scholars allow it. The majority rejects this position because of the miraculous character of the Arabic wording of the Quran, the so-called ijaz. There are some scholars who allow those believers to recite a translation or to pray in their own language for the time when they learn to recite the Arabic Quran properly. In cases where believers who are not native speakers of Arabic cannot learn to recite the Quran properly, it would be a legal concession, rukhsa, a well-justified exception to allow using braille computer interface. The only restriction could be that this concession should not lead to laziness in memorizing the Quran. And if we go a step further and ask the question whether it is allowed to make use of androids which are capable of leading a congregational prayer, we could also derive different arguments for its use or its prohibition. There are different views among scholars about the conditions for the leader of the prayer, the imam, how old the prayer leader should be, how much knowledge the imam should have about the Quran, how exactly he should recite the Quran, and whether imams do match the conditions of techniques of recitation, and also whether it is allowed for women to perform the prayer as imams in front of a mixed group of believers or only among women. All these questions could become obsolete if a well-programmed, AI-supported robot imam were to lead the prayer with perfect abilities for this ritual, free from gender-related boundaries and errors in recitation or leadership. The unresolved problem or question is then whether the previously addressed required ritual purity applies to robots, as well as whether the spiritual dimension of the ritual prayer could be lost by involving non-human agents in its performance. This dimension of spirituality related to the human soul plays also a crucial role in various rituals, such as the pilgrimage. Now I want to highlight this as a second fictitious example of transhumanist enhancement, the VR pilgrimage. Virtual reality, VR, is already part of recent developments regarding, for instance, computer games, smartphones, and smart TVs. I think all of us are using VR in different ways, or had the possibility to use VR in different ways. Thus, a VR system could be developed in a way that allows users to experience a fully immersive simulation of a journey with sensory feedback. Such a technology would allow Muslim believers to pursue their duty to perform the pilgrimage to Mecca and Medina, which is a once-in-a-lifetime obligation. There are many conditions for the pilgrimage, such as being healthy, having the financial means for the journey, and providing for the livelihood of the family that stays behind, etc. Further, many Muslims who fulfill the requirements for pilgrimage cannot attend the journey because of the limited access to the holy places. Millions of believers want to perform the pilgrimage at the same time, since Hajj is only possible once a year. There are also believers who want to perform the pilgrimage but have a physical disability due to age, illness, or financial limitations, so they cannot attend the journey. However, they can delegate it to someone from their family to perform it in their stead if they have the financial means. VR could enable believers around the world to participate in the pilgrimage, and not only once in a lifetime. Allowing VR pilgrimage could thus make the pilgrimage more accessible, but it might also diminish the value and exclusivity of actual pilgrimage. The question arises whether VR can be considered a valid substitute for physical pilgrimage, given the significance of bodily presence and physical exertion in performing it. One could argue that pilgrimage is a bodily and spiritual experience that cannot be separated from each other. It represents the bodily resurrection in the hereafter and judgment day, where, according to the Quran, humans will be alike and equal, which is resembled in the white clothing that pilgrims wear during the pilgrimage. Especially in the literature on the mystical dimension of pilgrimage, scholars highlight the value of bodily and spiritual experience, like stoning Satan as resembling stoning one's own ego that tempts one to act badly. The pilgrimage further requires physical attendance in specific places at specific times, connected with the bodily performance of rituals, like ihram, wearing specific clothes, and performing circumambulation of the Kaaba, tawaf, and performing the ritual prayer at certain places like Mina and Muzdalifah. It is thus questionable whether VR can replace bodily attendance in Mecca and the surrounding area. Further, scholars understand pilgrimage as self-cultivation and education, since the hardship of the journey can have a direct effect on the attitude towards life. However, scholars might permit VR pilgrimage only for those unable to perform the physical pilgrimage due to legitimate cases of hardship, again in the sense of a legal concession. Rukhsa. Coming now to the third case study. Transhumanist enhancement does not only concern matters of ritual, of course, it has also direct impacts on daily life and social relationships. One could think of a scenario where AI-enhanced childbirth, such as artificial wombs, could be used for procreation. New technologies could allow children to be gestated in artificial wombs, called ectogenesis, reducing the risks and challenges associated with childbirth. Couples could consider this method as a way to avoid physical demands of pregnancy. Using artificial wombs would challenge the idea of parenthood. If the child is born outside the mother's body, how might Islamic law interpret the child's status, especially concerning inheritance and family rights? Further, is it acceptable to avoid traditional childbirth purely for convenience, or should ectogenesis only be used for medical necessity? One can expect that scholars, as they often do in discussions about bio and medical ethics, allow the usage of artificial wombs to prevent serious health risks to mother or child. They often refer to the above-mentioned general principle that harm should be avoided. We also have pre-modern cases that serve as a model for contemporary questions, where scholars discuss ending a pregnancy if the mother is at risk of death. It is also not far-fetched to assume that scholars could refer to the idea that God created the world in a specific divine and natural order. Using artificial wombs would transgress these boundaries. We also need to reflect on physiological, societal, and evolutional aspects with regard to the implications of transhumanist enhancement overcoming sexuality or biological sex using reproductive procreation. Since these developments could ignore important aspects of femininity in the evolution of humankind and conceptualizes a man-centered view on procreation. As the Turkish theologian Soysal puts it, I quote, "The ideal reproductive scenario envisioned by transhumanism involves enhancing male bodies and masculine processes. On the other hand, femininity and motherhood, with their associated costs of bearing and raising children, are considered burdens that must be overcome." End of quote. Similar considerations, she is criticizing the man-centered idea of overcoming childbirth. Similar considerations, as mentioned above, could be extended to cases of genetic engineering and the idea of longevity expanding the lifespan of people. Coming now to the conclusions, the aim of the presentation was to highlight some major challenges that Islamic law and ethics faces with regard to transhumanist ideas of enhancement. As a cross-section of possible discussions, we could see that various basic assumptions of Islamic law play a role in the process of classifying transhumanist ideas under Islamic law and ethics. There is not a single argumentation that allows or forbids enhancement from an Islamic perspective. And there is need for knowledge from different academic disciplines to evaluate transhumanist enhancement. It is, therefore, not surprising that scholars deal with related questions in institutions that allow collective research and legal reasoning, collective ijtihad jama'i, as already practiced in the so-called fiqh academies, the majami' fiqhiyya, while issuing their resolutions and fatwas, qararat and fatawa. Islamic law is dependent on philosophical, theological, ethical, sociological, medical and biological reflections on transhumanist concepts, ideas and developments. At the current stage, it can only react to these developments. However, it has a basic structure that allows for flexible and dynamic solutions, which do not inevitably lead to a positive or negative evaluation of transhumanist ideas on enhancement. If people act responsibly for the sake of human existence, and if the core assumptions of Islamic law are respected and not ignored, the Islamic legal and ethical tradition has the potential to adapt the newest developments by reflecting on them theologically, legally, and ethically. This would also allow it to serve as a powerful and useful tool for reflecting on recent technological developments and their impact on human life and action, with a plurality of Islamic legal and ethical views. However, this requires a highly sophisticated new approach to legal discussions in an interdisciplinary manner. The Islamic legal tradition can develop an overarching Islamic philosophy of law or a legal philosophy as a response to this need. One of the major questions, in my view, that could be dealt with in Islamic philosophy of law now is the question of personhood. How to define it, how it relates to the existence of body and soul, and how legal and ethical responsibility will be affected by the concept of personhood. This question, as we have seen above, seems to be a fruitful starting point for an interdisciplinary study that engages with philosophy, law, and ethics, and also with regard to transhumanism. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Kurnaz, for the very interesting presentation and mind-blowing ideas. We will open the floor for Q&A. So if you have questions, this is the chance to raise them. Yeah, please go ahead, Victoria.
So many issues, it's really hard to pick just one which most of those are. And like you've mentioned them, they were more on like individual level, or focused more on the relations between human being and God directly. I would also say that transhumanism presents a challenge more on a group and social level. For example, it can be considered as a factor that really threatens political, social, and religious integrity of ḥurma. For example, with Professor Ghali, whenever we discuss any advancements in bioethics, there's always a challenge of availability of the technology. So this technology becomes available and is developed for one part of the Muslim community, ummah, and others they do not have, they're less privileged to get access to it. It already creates the disbalance, so it can create the threat for mutiny and internal harm. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your comment. Absolutely. The reason why I could not put it in was that it would go beyond the scope of the article, but you are definitely correct. And if you also read transhumanist articles of transhumanists, some of them also highlight especially this question of availability and the question of justice. And especially in the special issues I showed before here in the state of the art, there is a very interesting article of Soysal and another author who focused the question of justice particularly. So that's a very, very important question. Thank you very much for highlighting it.
Yes,
Thank you, Professor. This is very interesting, as usual. There are so many new things to deal with when we discuss Islamic ethics. But then I was just wondering, as you highlighted each of these issues, that, of course, I've not read so much about what scholars have said about Islamic transhumanism. But then when you brought fictive examples of pilgrimage and Quran and all of those things, I found some of them very hard to be convincing, because today people who don't speak Arabic memorize Quran a lot. In fact, if you check the ranking, the top countries are not even Arab countries, and they memorize the Quran a lot. And to a great extent, the Islamic nation is doing a lot of things to make Hajj easy on people. And considering the issue of rukhsa, I think, aren't we trying to overstretch this reach? Because Islam is so interesting that if you don't have the capability for something, it's not compulsory upon you. So why should we look for rukhas, for things that are not even binding in the first instance? And also, when we think about transhumanism, when we think about the Islamic worldview, the concept of khilafah, man has an existential function, and God has endowed humans with the perfect natural composition to achieve this existential function. So if we are talking about transhumanism, for what exactly are we transforming ourselves? Are we saying that we don't have what's sufficient to achieve our goals as humans? And when we now bring this, so I actually think sometimes we're trying to, of course, create solutions to some problems, but at the same time we're creating new problems and we're engineering solutions for them. Take, for instance, we discussed the issue of cryonics with Dr. Sami last semester, and people are trying to prolong their lives, they don't want to die. And Quran talks about the issue of ajal. So if everyone has a time to die, and you are going to die regardless, why should we try to prolong people's lives? Why should we try to freeze them in some cylinders, wasting a lot of money? Like, do we need all of these things?
Yes.
And do we need to really convene citizens and begin to issue rulings for things like this? Do we need that, actually?
Thank you very much. These are questions that we have to relate to transhumanists who require these ideas of longevity and so on and so forth. That would be the first part of my answer, because it is a reality that people speak about it, and we have to reflect about it. And theologically, this is also a theological argument to say there is an end for each life. There cannot be a concept of longevity. But then the answer of transhumanists are always, I have only a talk with one. He says, then why should your theological answer should consider me? That's only a theological position, so that is not convincing for me. So we have to delve into these questions in order to say, okay, that's a theologically argued position, but it is not far-fetched. It is a reality that life ends. And then we have to engage with these questions also having in mind, okay, we have in mind with that we have a human body, and we have also a human soul that goes hand in hand with responsibility and so on and so forth. So we have to engage with these questions in order to make it also accessible to those who challenge it. That would be the first one. The second one of rukhsa, you are right. Rukhsa could be used, and this was also discussed in among pre-modern scholars, when we can use rukhas. And the tendency is always to say, okay, not so many to establish not so many rukhas. But on the other hand, you can be sure that if we have the opportunity to enhance our abilities for Quran memorizing by using the interface, Muslim people will engage with that. So you have to be prepared to have different answers how to engage with this question. So as I mentioned, the case studies are fictitious case studies in cases where Muslims should or would make use of these technologies. How can we react to that? So rukhsa is also what I would say is one of the not so well argued positions regarding in contrast to the first two ones. And what you have said already or commented on, that is also one possible theological answer, or one possible answer with regard to Islamic law, directing to the Muslim people to say, okay, if you have not the means for pilgrimage, why trying to use use a technology that goes beyond the traditional ideas of performing pilgrimage. But you have to also keep in mind that we, especially in Europe, we made Jum'ah prayers in our homes during COVID pandemic. So sometimes it happens, and then you have to be prepared to have, you have to be convinced, or you have to have insight in the internal logic of the whole system of Islamic law in order to prohibit it, or to also to say okay, or to permit it.
Thank you
So-
very much. And I have another question now. So
Of course.
you said something regarding robots, and I'm actually working on a paper that addresses AI and sex robots, basically.
Mhm.
And would
Ah,
you
yeah.
say that? Would you say that AIs can fill that void, can be bedmates? Because talking of taklīf and
Mhm.
ahliyya,
Mhm.
can AIs ever become
Mhm.
responsible, legally and morally?
Mhm. I would say, again, with regard to Mullah Khusrav, this is impossible. If we follow which would be outdated, a Neoplatonist idea of a soul and how responsibility comes with regard to the different stages of the intellect, the reason, then one has to say, okay, there cannot be any responsibility because we cannot prove that AI robots have a conscience. But we have to engage with interdisciplinary research in what conscience is and what personhood means. Then we can decide if whether AI can be responsible or not. At the current stage of theological research, I would say there is no valid argumentation for regarding AI robots as being legally responsible as humans are. And I also know that there is a desideratum for further research because we haven't engaged with philosophical ideas on what consciousness is. The transhumanists reduce consciousness on neurotical connections. They say there is no such thing as consciousness. So we have to prove that there is consciousness related to soul, so that we can also say AI robots are not legally responsible. Those who make use of AI robots, AI robots have the responsibility of what the AI robot does. So that's more or less the basic position. I found it quite convincing because I do not find it convincing that that humans do not have a soul. That is quite. I cannot understand that position, and I can also not understand any Stoker's position to say the soul. We can also think about the soul as being a material entity that does not change anything. So that would only enable to say, okay, transhumanists do not have to reject the idea of a soul because the soul can be also material. But I'm sure that transhumanists have a problem with the soul as such because it would undermine the idea of enhancing the possibilities of human existence. It's not a straightforward answer, but you can hear my tendency.
Thank you. Yeah, please.
Thank you so much. It was literally very captivating because I could not resist because of the topic and I have a presentation going on. So the stress is high, but I could not resist. Thank you so much. I have a question that whenever we talk about taklīf and ahliyya, there is another concept of zimma.
Yes.
And then zimma goes to misaq.
Yeah.
Even if we develop some sort of personhood with moral and ethical responsibility, how do we situate zimma, particularly the idea that it goes with the idea of misaq, right?
Yeah.
It's intertwined. And if it is so, then how ahliyya or how taklīf will be kind of attached to any other being? So how does it like set with that, even if it goes for the first fictitious study that we have or any other form?
Yeah. You are right. There is no. I don't have an answer for that question because I'm also convinced that the zimma does not apply to AI robots because we haven't solved the problem of do they have a soul or not. And my point would be the same as you have mentioned. Because of the mithaq, there is no ensoulment of this AI robot, so it isn't impossible. But the question is it possible to transfer my soul to an avatar? And then what does that mean? So this is also a second challenge. So my soul had the mithaq in Besmi Eles, as we call it in Turkish, in Qalu Bala. But can my soul be transferred from my body to another being? I say. a shell or an avatar, and what does this make with my soul? Because soul and body are intertwined, and as I understand the Quran, nafs and body are related to each other. So if the soul leaves the body, then it changes or goes back to God. And this is also related to bodily resurrection in the hereafter. What does it mean for the bodily resurrection as well? So these are questions. I don't have any answers to that, but I cannot imagine, or I cannot theologically imagine, that AI robots with consciousness could have a soul. We cannot create souls. That would mean that we make use of created souls from God. We could use Neoplatonist ideas to say that we have a direct connection to aqlul fa'al, and there is also created souls. But the Neoplatonist idea of how intellect works or responsibility is very outdated. So modern philosophy does not work with these Neoplatonist ideas. So there are a bunch of questions how to deal with that question. But thank you very much for highlighting that point as well.
I have a question. It may be linked to to both of them. It's about the enhanced human as autonomous weapon, or again as a soldier. Is there any, like in the literature, question about the legal responsibility, and if there is any, if it's not the AI person or whatever we can, is there like a responsibility for the person who did the algorithm, or is it too much to calculate because the unintended consequence is just incomprehensible?
As far as I know, I don't know if there is any article or study on that, but we had that discussion in a conference in Germany. So I will wrap up a little bit what I have heard there. Since today it is not possible to generate AI robots who independently create own knowledge or consciousness, who reproduces more or less what we think and what we know by using our knowledge we are providing for these robots. Those who create these robots and the algorithms are responsible for their use. It is not related, although we cannot expect, or although we do not know directly the outcomes. If we cannot control it, then it's our problem, because it's like using a machine gun. You want to shoot at one target, but you are not capable of using it, and you are killing many people who are innocent. So you are responsible for using that. That is the analogy they have in mind. As a weapon, you have the analogy to say those who create this weapon have the full responsibility. But once we have the generative AI robots who can, you have something like a conscience, or something like creating definitely new knowledge, then the question would be, is then this AI responsible for killing people? This also, there is an interesting article, but I cannot remember if the author gave an answer, proper answer to that. It is again, I think it was Izzeddin al-Mahjoub, who also asked this question related to automated cars who can drive without a driver. So there also, if there is a car accident, who is the responsible one? I think he related it also to those who program that car, rather that the car is being responsible for that accident. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, Lida.
I find like the parameters of the questions is infinite, and so that makes it difficult to develop this and to some kind of principle to operate with. Like you mentioned, nootropic drugs. I mean, coffee, tea are technically stimulants, right?
Yeah.
Or like improving sense perception, or smartphones, use of ChatGPT for generating knowledge. And then there's the really ambitious questions about the soul. And is it? I mean, I'm wondering, how could we draw some kind of parameters so we can maybe address different levels or different areas?
Yes, definitely. I would suggest to start with theoretical questions, because transhumanism, as its core, as I understand it, is also very theoretical with regard to their big ideas. Of course, as you have mentioned, in the literature you can see also that some transhumanists say, okay, glasses are also enhancement of sense perception. Yes, but it is by far not changing the human experience and human body or human capabilities as transcending the human body does. So therefore, I would say, first of all, the idea of this article or presentation was also to find a spot where also practical questions are related to theoretical ones, like personhood. And I think that one of the core issues is personhood. What does it mean to be a person? What does it mean to be human? So that is one of the core questions that will directly affect all the ideas of enhancement. I would not much rely on the idea or focus on the idea what enhancement means, what transhumanist enhancement means, rather what personhood means and what protection of life means, because this is directly related also to discussions like genetic engineering, organ transplantation, and so on, what we know about bioethics and medical ethics for a longer period of time in comparison to transhumanist ideas. So it is also my focus in my research is always theoretical. Therefore, I'm also somehow biased in theoretical discussions. But I think that these core ideas of what is human existence and what is personal would be a good start, and that would enable us to also have more clear boundaries and more clear frame to phrase the whole questions and to go on with our research and reflections.
Yeah, I like that reframe much better.
Yeah.
So you're not really trying to figure out how to best memorize the Quran.
No.
Figure out what's
Yeah.
human, what's the soul.
Yeah, exactly. That's also related. I mean, I made these fictitious cases because sometimes if we talk about transhumanism, I wanted to show also transhumanist ideas could also be not only far-fetched, it could be also something related to an application as we do it. I mean, we are sometime I don't know when it was, but Muslim scholars of course discussed whether we are allowed to enter the bathroom with our phones, because some of us have Quran applications in it. So you have directly also very more or less easy questions to solve. Therefore, I wanted to show in the case studies also that there are some questions, if it says transhumanism, that is not something very big. But there could be also very big questions like the ectogenesis and decoupling procreation from human bodies and human existence. These would be then the bigger questions. Yeah. You're welcome.
Any other questions, comments? Well, thank you very much.
Thank you,
Professor Kurnaz. I think it's very interesting, and I cannot agree with you more about the interdisciplinarity aspect of it, because it's not about just studying these cases according to the legal principles like Sadd al-Dhara'i or Fath al-Dhara'i or Rukhas or something like this. It's much more than this. It has to do with the human identity as a human, as a person, as you said. And I think we need to take, I mean, although some aspects it looks like, fiction, but we don't know. I mean, that I think scholars from all disciplines need to engage seriously with discussion about not just transhumanism, but about technology and where does it take it. And maybe I will take the idea of what Ridwan said, like, well, we need technology to facilitate our lives. I mean, we need maybe to redefine the purposes of the technology. So what's the point of moving my consciousness to, I don't know, to...
whatever.
Glass,
A computer
right?
program.
I mean, there should be reason. I mean, otherwise, we are just, how to say, following our whims, ahwa, right? So I want to sleep now and wake up after 100 years and see how the world is going on. Is this fine?
Yeah.
Okay,
Exactly.
I mean, legally, I would say there's nothing against it, right?
Yeah.
But like as a human being, as identity, and how life is going on, it's really strange, right?
Exactly.
It will make very strange situations for no reason, for no specific reason, apart from our ahwa, our whims, right?
Exactly.
So the interdisciplinarity, the urgency of I mean, ethical discussions, like serious ethical discussions between different parties, and taking this I mean, how to say, seriously. I mean, the AI and the regulations for AI now is very important. It's now going on for. Transhumanism, we don't know when it will start, but it may start at any point, and we need, as you said, regulations for this. Well, thank you very much. If we maybe I wanted at the beginning, but because we were a little bit late, maybe just a couple of I mean. Short background about the Islamic theology in Germany, because we didn't introduce this. I wanted to do that, but I forgot.
No, it's fine. It's fine. Totally, I can do that. So basically, what we call in Germany Islamic theology is you have to think about Islamic studies in general. The reason why we chose, why the technical term developed as being Islamic theology is, in Germany we have Islamwissenschaft, which is Islamic studies in general, and we have also, like the Christian theology, Islamic theology, engaging with the same questions from a Muslim inner perspective. So the German government decided in the year 2010 and 11 to establish in Germany centers for Islamic theology, engaging with Islamic studies, but from a inner Muslim perspective. Doing it, teaching Islamic law, teaching Islamic theology, kalam, teaching hadith studies, Quran studies, Arabic, Islamic history, Sufism, and religious education. The reason behind it was that in Germany, in the constitution, religious communities have the right that their children have the subject religion as a school subject. And the German government said that that should be also the case for Muslims, because there were some projects going on in the late 1990s and at the beginning of the year of the 2000s, and especially also with 9/11, there was also an increasing political interest in de-radicalization and preventing radicalization. So they said that we need at the university a academic teaching of religious teachers for religious education at school. So basically, therefore, we need also Islamic theology from a Muslim perspective, because the content of the subject religion at school, the German state is not allowed to define what the content should be, because the state is a secular state, and the state gives the responsibility for the accuracy with the Islamic tradition to religious communities. So this is also a idea that works among the Christian church, but as you know, we don't have a institution like a church in Islamic tradition. So the question was whom to ask what the content is. Anyway, we solved the problem in a different way, and we did not make the analogy to the churches. Now we have 7 centers for Islamic theology in Frankfurt, in Berlin, in Paderborn, in Münster, Osnabrück, Tübingen, and Nuremberg-Erlangen, where we have professors, more or less between 4 and 6 professors for Quran and Hadith, 1 professor for Islamic law, professor for Islamic education, professor for Islamic theology, philosophy, and sometimes Sufism, intellectual history, and often a professor for interreligious studies. Whom I forgot? No one. So this is more or less the professors at the centers. And our curriculum is, we have bachelor studies and master's degrees, and our curriculum is comparable with studies here or in Turkey, basically Islamic history, Arabic studies, law, fiqh, hadith, Quran, exegesis, and Quranic studies, ulum al-Quran, kalam, Islamic religious education, which we call in Germany Islamic pedagogy, and also Sufism, and so on. We have also PhD programs, And we have something called habilitation in Germany. This is like an independent research of a doctor or a doctor in philosophy on theology, doing a research without a supervision, and goes through a formal evaluation at the university. So you are then allowed to get a professor position and to teach that very subject. I studied Islamic theology in Frankfurt. Then it was called not Islamic theology because it was not allowed at that time. It was called Islamic religion. I studied Islamic religion and Jewish Christian studies and pedagogy in Frankfurt. And in 2011, it was called then Islamic theology. Did I forget something? I don't think so, but if you have questions related to the institutional structure of Islamic theology in Germany, please feel free to ask. That's the very short history of the establishment of Islamic theology in Germany. A second factor, yes, I remember now, besides of religious education at schools, was interreligious dialogue. And the idea was there were many projects on Islamic and Christian theological interreligious studies, and the idea was to also provide on an academic level training in interreligious dialogue. But we in Germany, we used that opportunity to say, okay, before we could do dialogue, we have to properly learn the own tradition, an Islamic tradition. So we have one module in our curriculum related to interreligious studies, but most of the subjects are related to the Islamic tradition.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Any questions, comments? Well, thank you very much, Professor Kurnaz, for very interesting presentation and discussion. It was a pleasure. And we will see you on Wednesday, I think, right? In the conference.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your attendance, your questions, and communication.